The thunder of naval bombardment shattered the pre-dawn darkness on November 20th, 1943. Batio Island lay beneath a relentless pounding as the battleships Maryland and Colorado unleashed their 16-inch shells against Japanese positions scattered across the tiny coral atoll in the Gilbert Islands. The barrage was deafening, precise, methodical. In the lagoon below, Marines from the 2nd Marine Division found themselves struggling through chest-deep water. Their landing craft sat grounded on the coral reef, stranded nearly 500 yards from the beach. The unexpected low tide had transformed what should have been a quick approach into a nightmare wade through waist-high water under withering fire. Among these men was Staff Sergeant William Bordelon, serving with the 1st Battalion, 18th Marines. His equipment bag hung heavy with demolition charges. At his hip, his M1911A1 pistol rested in its holster, already saturated with seawater, yet mechanically perfect. Behind those Marines lay an island fortress. The Japanese defenders, numbering around 4,500 under Rear Admiral Kagishiba Zuki, had transformed this scrap of coral, less than 3 square miles, into a hardened strongpoint bristling with defenses. Japanese officers carried the Type 14 Nambu pistol, chambered in the distinctive 8.22mm cartridge. As the Marines pressed forward through the killing field of the lagoon, Japanese machine guns erupted from hidden pillboxes, sweeping the exposed water with deadly accuracy. What would unfold over the next 76 hours would demonstrate with stark clarity the superiority of American small arms design. The M1911A1, firing its powerful 45 ACP cartridge, would prove its worth against weapons that failed at the critical moment. In the close-quarters devastation of Tarawa, where combat distances measured mere feet and inches, the difference between a 230-grain bullet delivering 370 foot-pounds of energy and a 100-grain projectile producing barely 220 foot-pounds meant the difference between survival and death. The chasm separating American and Japanese military sidearms reflected far more than different design philosophies. It revealed vastly different industrial capabilities, tactical doctrines, and fundamental understanding of what makes an effective combat weapon. The M1911A1 represented the culmination of decades of American combat experience and industrial innovation. The Type 14 Nambu, with its underpowered 8mm round and delicate mechanism, embodied Japan's desperate struggle to match Western military technology while lacking the industrial foundation and combat feedback necessary for effective weapons development. This disparity would manifest itself in every close-quarters engagement from Guadalcanal to Okinawa, where the thunder of the American 45 consistently overwhelmed the inadequate pop of the Japanese 8mm. These two weapons tell a story far deeper than ballistics and manufacturing. They reveal how industrial power and engineering excellence determine victory in modern warfare. The genesis of the M1911A1 traces back not to the Pacific, but to the Philippine jungles 4 decades earlier. During the Philippine-American War from 1899 to 1902, American soldiers confronted a horrifying tactical problem that would reshape military sidearm development forever. The Moro Juramentados, Muslim warriors who bound their limbs with leather to prevent blood loss and consumed native drugs to dull pain, launched suicidal charges against American positions. The standard Army sidearm at the time was the Model 1892 double-action revolver. Chambered in .38 Long Colt, it proved catastrophically inadequate for the task. Colonel Louis Lagarde documented the gruesome encounters in his medical reports. Soldiers would empty their revolvers into charging Moros, placing multiple shots at close range directly into the chest, only to watch helplessly as the attackers continued forward, using blade weapons to kill Americans. Lagarde's 1904 report described one particularly haunting case. Antonio Caspi absorbed 4 close-range hits from .38 caliber rounds. 3 bullets pierced his lungs. Another passed completely through his body, yet Caspi continued fighting until finally stopped by a rifle butt to the forehead. The .38 Long Colt's 150-grain bullet, traveling at 770 feet per second, simply lacked the energy transfer necessary to immediately incapacitate an attacker. This horrifying failure prompted the military to undertake its most comprehensive ballistic study ever, the Thompson-Lagarde tests of 1904. Colonel John T. Thompson, who would later develop the famous Thompson submachine gun, and Major Louis Anatole Lagarde from the Medical Corps received orders to determine the minimum effective caliber for military pistols. At the Nelson Morris Company Union Stockyards in Chicago, they conducted experiments that modern standards would consider barbaric, but which provided invaluable scientific data. The tests involved shooting live cattle and human cadavers with various calibers, including the 7.65mm Parabellum, 30 Luger, 9mm Parabellum, 38 Long Colt, 38 ACP, 45 Colt, 476 Ely, and 455 Webley. The methodology was rigorous. Researchers recorded the time required for incapacitation in live animals, measured body sway, and tracked suspended cadavers, examined wound channels through dissection and the newly developed X-ray technology. The findings proved unequivocal. Animals shot with 30 Luger ammunition displayed minimal distress even after receiving 10 rounds. Those hit with 9mm or 38 caliber rounds showed greater effect, but frequently required 8 or more shots to achieve incapacitation. Animals struck with 45 caliber rounds typically collapsed by the fourth shot, exhibiting immediate and severe physiological trauma. The cadaver tests revealed even more dramatic differences. When bullets struck bone, researchers assigned numerical values to the resulting body movement. The 45 caliber rounds consistently produced 2 to 3 times more oscillation than smaller calibers. The board's conclusion was absolute and unambiguous. A bullet effective for military use must possess sufficient shock and stopping power at short ranges. The caliber should not be less than 45 inches. They noted that below this threshold, no amount of velocity increase within practical handgun parameters could compensate for insufficient bullet mass. John Moses Browning, already renowned for his firearms innovations, had been developing a semi-automatic pistol in .41 caliber, with Colt when the Army's requirements became clear. Browning rapidly scaled his design to accommodate a .45 caliber cartridge, creating what became the Model 1905. The cartridge underwent several iterations, developed through collaboration between Colt, Winchester Repeating Arms, Frankfurt Arsenal, and Union Metallic Cartridge Company. The original loading featured a 200-grain bullet traveling at 900 feet per second. This eventually evolved into the standardized military load used throughout the war. A 230-grain full-metal jacket bullet at 830 feet per second fired from a 5-inch barrel. The genius of Browning's design lay in its elegant simplicity and robust reliability. The M1911 utilized short recoil operation with a swinging link that lowered the barrel out of engagement with the slide during the firing cycle. The single-action trigger provided a consistent, crisp pull. 2 safety mechanisms prevented accidental discharge while allowing rapid deployment. A grip safety that must be depressed, and a manual thumb safety. The 7-round detachable magazine could be quickly replaced, and the pistol would fire the chambered round even without a magazine inserted, a crucial feature when magazines were damaged or lost in combat. From 1906 to 1911, the pistol underwent extensive testing and competed against designs from Savage, Luger, and others. The torture tests were extraordinary in their severity. Armorers fired 6,000 rounds as rapidly as possible, accomplishing this feat in just 27 minutes, then dunked the heated pistol in water, mud, and sand between successive strings of fire. The Browning Colt design functioned flawlessly through every ordeal. On March 29, 1911, the United States Army formally adopted the automatic pistol, caliber .45, model of 1911. Combat experience in World War I led to refinements that were incorporated into the M1911A1, which became the standard in 1924. The improvements addressed feedback from soldiers who had fought in the trenches. The trigger was shortened to accommodate smaller hands. Scalloped cuts were added to the frame behind the trigger for better reach. The mainspring housing was arched to improve natural pointing ability. The grip safety spur was lengthened to prevent hammerbite. The sights were widened for faster target acquisition. The hammer spur was shortened to reduce snagging on equipment or clothing. These modifications, while seemingly minor in isolation, reflected the American military's systematic approach to incorporating combat lessons into equipment development. The .45 ACP cartridge itself represented optimized ballistic performance within practical constraints. It operated at relatively low chamber pressure of 21,000 psi, compared to 35,000 psi for 9mm parabellum, prioritizing reliability and barrel longevity over raw velocity. The 230-grain projectile, with its 451-inch diameter, created a wound channel significantly larger than the bullet's actual caliber due to tissue displacement. At 830 feet per second, the bullet traveled just below the speed of sound, avoiding the instability that occurs during transonic flight. The heavy bullet retained its energy exceptionally well, maintaining lethal force even at extended handgun ranges of 50 yards or more. When America entered World War II, M19-1A1 production transformed from peacetime trickle into a wartime flood that demonstrated American industrial capability at its peak. Colt's manufacturing company, holder of the original patents and production expertise, immediately expanded operations at their Hartford, Connecticut facility. Yet even Colt's maximum capacity of approximately 800 pistols daily by 1943 could not satisfy demand. The Ordnance Department under Brigadier General Gladden Barnes orchestrated one of the war's most successful distributed manufacturing programs. Unlike the artisanal methods required for complex weapons, the M1911A1's robust design permitted mass production techniques. Remington Rand, the typewriter manufacturer, received their initial contract in March 1942. Their Syracuse, New York plant, converted from producing typing machines and adding machines, ultimately manufactured 877 751 M9911A1 pistols, surpassing production from any other contractor, including Colt. Their manufacturing approach revolutionized pistol production through extensive use of stamping instead of forging, automated checkering of grip frames, and statistical quality control that maintained tolerances while dramatically accelerating production. Ithaca Gun Company of New York, traditionally a shotgun manufacturer, produced 369,129 pistols. They innovatively employed investment casting for small parts, reducing machining time by 60%. Union Switch and Signal Company of Swissvale, Pennsylvania, a railroad equipment manufacturer, produced 55,000 pistols of exceptional quality. They incorporated improved heat treatment processes that extended barrel life by 30%. Singer Manufacturing Company's contribution, though numerically small at 500 pistols, demonstrated American industrial flexibility. These sewing machine manufacturers produced firearms of such superior quality that Singer M1911A1s remain the most sought-after variants among collectors. Singer developed tooling and processes later transferred to other manufacturers, multiplying their impact well beyond direct production figures. Part standardization was absolute and non-negotiable. Any component from any manufacturer would function properly in any frame. Tolerances were deliberately loose, measuring 1.003 to 0.0005 inches in most critical dimensions, ensuring reliable function despite manufacturing variations, field contamination, or thermal expansion during use. This interchangeability proved absolutely crucial when depot-level maintenance often involved assembling functional pistols from components salvaged from multiple damaged weapons. The ammunition supply chain matched weapon production seamlessly. Frankfurt Arsenal, the Army's primary ammunition facility, produced over 1 billion rounds of 45 ACP throughout the war. Western Cartridge Company, Remington Arms, and Winchester Repeating Arms together added another 2 billion rounds. Quality control remained stringent and rigorous. Every ammunition lot underwent accuracy testing, pressure testing, and function testing across multiple weapons. Specifications remained remarkably consistent throughout all production runs. The standard load featured a 230-grain bullet with 5.0 grains of powder, either bullseye or similar burning rate propellant, producing 830 feet per second velocity plus or minus 25 feet per second. Special ammunition variants demonstrated American innovation and adaptability. The M12 shot cartridge, developed for aircrew survival kits, contained 118 pieces of number 7.5 birdshot encased in a paper capsule, effective against small game up to 10 feet. The improved M15 shot cartridge utilized a blue wax capsule for superior moisture resistance. Tracer rounds allowed shooters to observe their bullet paths for training purposes. Proof loads marked with special stained cases tested +P pressure resistance during manufacturing inspections. The Marine Corps Table of Organization evolved to reflect combat lessons regarding pistol importance. In 1942, a Marine division was authorized 798 pistols, primarily issued to officers, non-commissioned officers, and crew-served weapon teams. By December 1943, following the experiences at Tarawa, this authorization increased to 1,377 pistols. By 1945, the authorization reached 1,707 pistols per division. The 1st Marine Division on Okinawa actually carried over 2,000 M9911A1s, with many riflemen acquiring pistols through unofficial channels. Distribution prioritized frontline combat units. The 2nd Marine Division at Tarawa carried 1,456 M9911A1 pistols distributed among approximately 18,000 Marines, providing roughly one pistol for every 12 men. By the time of Iwo Jima, the 5th Marine Division carried 1,189 pistols for similar total strength, achieving one pistol for approximately every 10 men. Army units displayed similar patterns. The 77th Infantry Division on Okinawa carried 1,234 M1911A1s among roughly 16,000 soldiers. The contrast with Japanese weapons would become devastatingly clear in combat. The Type 14 Nambu represented Imperial Japan's attempt to create a modern military sidearm, yet its development history reveals fundamental limitations that would prove catastrophic in battle. Colonel Kijiro Nambu, often called the John Browning of Japan, designed his first semi-automatic pistol in 1902. This Type A, Grandpa Nambu, superficially resembled the Luger with its exposed barrel and distinctive knurled cocking knob, but operated on entirely different mechanical principles. The Type 14, adopted in Taisho 14, which corresponds to 1926 in the Western calendar, evolved from these earlier Nambu designs. It incorporated supposed improvements based on Japanese military experience in China. The pistol utilized a locked breech mechanism with a floating locking block. The concept seemed sound in theory, but required manufacturing tolerances so precise that they often exceeded Japanese industrial capabilities. The 8.22mm Nambu cartridge, unique to Japanese weapons, fired a 102-grain bullet at approximately 1,065 feet per second from the Type 14's 4.6-inch barrel. Certain specifications on paper appeared superior to the M1911A1. The Type 14 held 8 rounds compared to 7 in the American pistol. Muzzle velocity exceeded the 45 ACP by 200 feet per second. The pistol weighed just 2.03 pounds unloaded, nearly half a pound lighter than the M1911A1. Initial production runs from Nagoya Arsenal and Kokura Arsenal displayed excellent craftsmanship, featuring deep bluing and careful hand-fitting of individual parts. However, these surface advantages masked fundamental flaws in design and conception. The 8.22mm Nambu cartridge, despite its higher velocity, generated only 256 foot-pounds of muzzle energy compared to the 45 ACP's 369 foot-pounds, a significant 31% deficit. The lightweight 102-grain bullet shed velocity rapidly, retaining only 180 foot-pounds at 50 yards versus 300 foot-pounds for the 45 ACP. The bottlenecked case design, while theoretically assisting with feeding, created extraction problems when chambers became fouled with residue. Japanese military procurement doctrine created additional complications that affected how the weapon was used in the field. Unlike American forces who were issued their weapons, Japanese officers were required to purchase their personal sidearms from their own salary. A Type 14 cost 78 yen in 1940, representing approximately half a lieutenant's monthly pay. This economic barrier meant many officers received minimal training, viewing the pistol as a status symbol rather than a genuine combat tool. Some officers, particularly those from wealthy families, purchased foreign pistols instead of the Type 14. Spanish ruby pistols in 32 ACP or inherited European revolvers appeared frequently among Japanese officers. The Type 14's design philosophy reflected Japanese tactical doctrine that prioritized spiritual power over actual firepower and combat effectiveness. The Imperial Japanese Army's infantry manual devoted more pages to sword technique than to pistol marksmanship. Pistols were considered tools for executing prisoners, maintaining control over subordinates, and ritual suicide, not primary combat weapons. This doctrinal blindness prevented recognition of design flaws that would prove fatal in actual combat situations. Manufacturing quality deteriorated catastrophically as the war progressed and resources grew scarce. Pre-war Type 14s featured 17 distinct inspection stamps, careful polishing, and hand-fitted parts that ensured reliability. By 1943, inspection marks reduced to merely 3. Surface finishing was eliminated entirely. Parts interchangeability degraded severely. Late-war production from the Toriyamatsu factory displayed obvious tool marks, rough casting, and dimensional variations that would have failed inspections during peacetime. The Type 14's most critical design failures centered on its controls and magazine system, creating operational nightmares in combat conditions. The safety lever, positioned on the left side above the trigger guard, required the shooting hand to shift grip or the support hand to operate it, an impossible task when wounded, carrying equipment, or physically grappling with an enemy. The magazine release, a spring-loaded lever at the bottom front of the grip, often released inadvertently during normal handling, leaving the pistol unable to fire due to the magazine disconnect safety feature. The 1939 modification added a magazine retention spring intended to prevent loss of magazines during combat. This improvement made combat reloading nearly impossible in practical terms. Magazines had to be yanked out against strong spring pressure, often requiring both hands in a frantic struggle. In tropical conditions, saltwater corrosion welded magazines into place. Marines reported capturing Type 14 pistols with magazines frozen solid inside the weapons. The magazines hammered unsuccessfully in desperate attempts to reload the pistol and continue fighting. Production statistics revealed Japan's industrial limitations starkly. From 1926 to 1945, approximately 400,000 Type 14 pistols were manufactured across all arsenals and subcontractors combined. Monthly production peaked at just 3,500 units in 1944, but quality remained abysmal throughout. The Nambu Rifle Manufacturing Company, Troy Kogyo Company, and Tokyo Gas and Electric subsidiaries produced pistols with such poor quality control that parts from different manufacturers or even different production runs from the same factory simply would not interchange. The Type 14 Nambu's failures in combat were not isolated incidents, but rather systematic design flaws that reflected fundamental misunderstanding of combat requirements. Each deficiency, perhaps tolerable in isolation, combined together to create a weapon that failed catastrophically under Pacific combat conditions. The safety mechanism represented the most immediate tactical liability, but other problems compounded this critical flaw. The safety lever positioned on the left side above the trigger guard presented a critical design flaw that manifested itself brutally in the chaos of close-quarters combat. Disengaging it required either sacrificing your firing grip and sight picture, losing your trigger finger's position, or awkwardly involving your support hand. When milliseconds determined whether you lived or died, this clumsy two-handed operation became a death sentence. Marines who faced Japanese officers in the confusion of overrun positions reported witnessing these enemy commanders fumbling uselessly with their safeties while being overwhelmed, unable to fire a single shot in their own defense. The M19-1A1 offered something fundamentally different. Its ambidextrous safety sat positioned where your firing hand's thumb could reach it naturally. You could disengage it while maintaining your grip and trigger finger placement, even while drawing the weapon from your holster in one fluid motion. But this advantage came with a hidden vulnerability. The magazine disconnect safety, designed to prevent accidental discharge when the magazine was removed, became a catastrophic weakness when equipment failed. Damaged magazines, lost magazines, or magazines seized solid by corrosion transformed the entire weapon into an inert piece of metal. Without a functioning magazine properly seated, nothing happened when you pulled the trigger. The Type 14 operated by fundamentally different rules. Unlike the M1911A1, which would fire its chambered round even without a magazine inserted, the Type 14 absolutely required a properly functioning seated magazine to operate at all. Across the coral sand of Tarawa or amid the volcanic ash of Iwo Jima, where magazines suffered constant damage, this design requirement rendered countless Type 14s completely useless. The Type 14 possessed another significant limitation. It lacked any slide-hold-open device. When your final round fired downrange, only the magazine follower held the bolt open. The moment you removed that magazine, the bolt slammed forward violently, giving absolutely no warning that your weapon had run dry. Combat shooters learned the hard way about empty chambers when their triggers clicked uselessly in the face of enemy fire. The M1911AA1's slide lock, activated by the magazine follower, locked the slide open after that last round fired. You got immediate visual confirmation and tactile feedback that your weapon had cycled empty. This accelerated your reloading tremendously. The Type 14 suffered from extraction failures that plagued it relentlessly, particularly when ammunition quality deteriorated. The bottlenecked 8.22mm cartridge, theoretically superior for smooth feeding, created a smaller bearing surface for the extractor to grip. Combined with wartime ammunition that used corrosive primers and inconsistent brass quality, cartridge cases either stuck stubbornly in chambers or ripped completely through the extractor. The straight-walled 0.45 ACP case featured a larger bearing surface and operated at lower pressure, extracting reliably even from fouled chambers caked with residue and corrosion. The recoil spring assembly in the Type 14 represented an intricate dual spring system, demanding precise manufacturing and meticulous maintenance. When springs lost their tension, accelerated by tropical heat and humidity that seemed to strip away all resilience, the weapon's cycling became erratic. Failure to return to battery happened regularly, requiring you to manually manipulate the slide back into position. The M1911A1's single recoil spring, even when weakened and worn, usually maintained enough function to keep the weapon combat effective. Tropical conditions exposed vulnerabilities the designers never anticipated. The Type 14's tight manufacturing tolerances, perfectly acceptable in Japan's temperate climate, became liabilities across the Pacific theater. At 115 degrees Fahrenheit on Peleliu, thermal expansion caused actions to bind and jam. On Guadalcanal, monsoon humidity created rust that froze entire mechanisms solid within days. The M1911A1's deliberately loose tolerances, mocked by competitive shooters as sloppy and crude, allowed the weapon to function despite thermal expansion, deep corrosion, or heavy contamination. Field maintenance became an insurmountable obstacle for the Type 14. The weapon required specialized tools for disassembly, a luxury that rarely existed in combat situations. Complete disassembly involved 34 separate operations, each one risking the loss of small springs and pins into mud or sand. The M1911A1 field, stripped without any tools whatsoever, accomplished in seconds. You depressed the recoil spring plug, rotated the bushing, removed the recoil spring and guide rod, pushed out the slide stop pin, then removed the slide and barrel. Reassembly simply reversed those steps. Marines field stripped and cleaned their pistols using whatever lay nearby, even urine when fresh water disappeared, and reassembled them blindfolded in under 30 seconds. Ammunition quality cascaded through the entire system as another layer of failure. By 1944, Japanese industry struggled desperately to maintain consistent powder charges and primer compounds. American ordnance units testing captured ammunition found velocity variations exceeding 200 feet per second within single production lots. Squib loads left bullets permanently lodged in barrels, and subsequent rounds created catastrophic failures. Excessive pressure rounds from double charges cracked frames and bulged chambers beyond repair. American 0.45 ACP ammunition maintained remarkable consistency throughout the entire war, with velocity variations rarely exceeding 25 feet per second within lots. The genuine test of these weapon systems arrived in the desperate, savage close-quarters fighting that defined Pacific Island combat. During the battle for Henderson Field on Guadalcanal from October 24th through 25th, 1942, Sergeant John Boussalone's actions demonstrated both the M1911A1's lethal effectiveness and the seamless integration of American weapon systems. Though Boussalone earned fame for his machine gun defense, witnesses reported he relied extensively on his M1911A1 when Japanese soldiers breached the perimeter. Private First Class Nash Phillips, wounded during that terrible fighting, later testified about what he witnessed. Boussalone had a machine gun going for 3 days and nights without sleep, rest, or food. He was in a good emplacement, causing the Japs lots of trouble, not only firing his machine gun, but also using his pistol. When Japanese soldiers penetrated the line during hand-to-hand fighting, Boussalone's M1911A1 proved devastatingly decisive. Each 230-grain hollow-point bullet, which Marines often created by cutting crosses into standard ball ammunition, delivered immediate stopping power that dropped men instantly. Phillips described witnessing Japanese soldiers knocked backward off their feet by Boussalone's pistol fire, their bodies flung through the air by the impact. The Japanese assault on Henderson Field involved approximately 3,000 soldiers from the Sendai Division attacking fewer than 700 Marine defenders along Boussalone's sector. The Japanese achieved local numerical superiority of nearly 5-1, making maximum effectiveness from every American weapon absolutely critical. Under such circumstances, the difference between the 0.45 ACP's immediate incapacitation and the 8mm Nambu's lesser stopping power multiplied across hundreds of individual engagements. At Tarawa, Staff Sergeant William Bourdillon's actions, though primarily involving demolition charges, included critical moments where small arms made the difference between success and failure. Bourdillon, an engineer with the 1st Battalion, 18th Marines, landed in the assault waves on November 20, 1943. His amphibious tractor absorbed numerous hits, killing all but 4 of the Marines aboard. Bourdillon's mission required destroying Japanese pillboxes with demolition charges, but approaching these positions demanded suppressive fire from other Marines. After placing charges on 2 pillboxes, Bourdillon took machine gun fire and became wounded. His demolition charges exhausted, Marine Combat Correspondent Staff Sergeant David Dempsey, who witnessed the action firsthand, reported that Bourdillon grabbed a rifle and continued fighting, covering other Marines as they moved forward through the fire. While accounts emphasized his demolition work, the close-quarters nature of the fighting meant pistols remained constantly employed. Bourdillon's M1911A1, like those carried by all Marine engineers, served as his last line of defense, while placing charges directly against enemy positions. The Type 14's combat failures found equal documentation. On Tarawa, Marine Private Robert Sherrod, a Time Life correspondent embedded with the 2nd Marine Division, witnessed a Japanese officer's desperate struggle with his Nambu. The Jap officer was screaming at his men, trying to shoot his pistol. He kept pulling the trigger, but nothing happened. The gun was jammed, sand maybe, or a bad magazine. A Marine shot him with a .45 from maybe 20 feet. The Jap flew backward like he'd been hit with a sledgehammer. Similar accounts multiplied across every island battlefield. On Saipan during June 15, 1944, when the largest Japanese banzai charge of the entire Pacific War erupted in pre-dawn darkness, Marine Corporal John D'Alessandro of the 27th Marines described close combat in vivid detail. They came at us in waves, officers in front waving swords and pistols. I saw one Jap officer trying to clear his jammed Nambu while running toward us. He was working the action frantically when I shot him with my .45. One shot sent him down, and he went down hard. The .45 would stop them cold. The impact was like hitting them with a baseball bat. The mathematical reality of stopping power emerged clearly in after-action medical reports. Marine Corps medical personnel documented wound characteristics, revealing that 45 ACP hits to the torso created temporary wound cavities exceeding 4 inches in diameter, causing immediate blood pressure collapse and nervous system disruption. The 8mm Nambu, firing its lighter, faster bullet, created wounds barely larger than the bullet's diameter itself, often requiring multiple hits before achieving incapacitation. Lieutenant Colonel Louis Chesty Puller, commanding 1st Battalion, 7th Marines at Guadalcanal, noted in his after-action report, the .45 automatic pistol proved invaluable in repelling Japanese infiltrators and banzai attacks. Multiple instances were observed where single rounds from the .45 immediately stopped attacking Japanese soldiers, while enemy officers armed with their issued pistols failed to inflict casualties even at close range. The disparity between the M1911A1 and Type 14, Nambu, reflected fundamentally different military philosophies shaped by distinct cultural and historical experiences. American doctrine, forged in frontier wars and colonial conflicts, prioritized firepower and individual marksmanship. Japanese doctrine, rooted in samurai tradition and Yamato Damashi, emphasized spiritual power over material advantage. The Thompson-Lagarde tests provided American forces with scientific justification for maximum stopping power. The conclusion that nothing less than .45 caliber would suffice became doctrine. This wasn't mere preference, but evidence-based requirement grounded in scientific measurement of stopping power. The tests measured not just whether bullets killed, but whether they stopped attackers immediately, before they could close distance or continue fighting. In close combat, that temporal element proved crucial. The difference between immediate and eventual incapacitation, measured in American lives, drove everything. American training reflected this emphasis on practical effectiveness. At Paris Island and Camp Pendleton, Marines fired thousands of rounds in pistol training. Training began with bullseye marksmanship, teaching trigger control, sight picture, and proper breathing, then progressed to combat shooting. Marines learned firing from retention position with the pistol pressed against their ribs, point shooting without using sights, and engaging multiple targets while moving tactically. The standard qualification required 70% hits on man-sized targets at 25 yards, firing 50 rounds under strict time pressure. The M1911A1's manual of arms emphasized combat efficiency. The Israeli draw technique, though not called that in 1943, became standard practice. You drew while simultaneously thumbing off the safety, your finger entering the trigger guard only after the muzzle cleared the holster and pointed toward your target. Marines practiced malfunction clearances until they became automatic. Tap the magazine, rack the slide, bang the trigger. They learned to count shots, reloading before the slide locked back when possible, maintaining continuous fire capability. Japanese pistol training remained minimal and ceremonial throughout the war. The Imperial Japanese Army's training manual devoted 2 pages to pistol marksmanship versus 12 full pages to sword technique. Officers received perhaps 50 rounds of annual training ammunition when available. The emphasis centered on precision shooting at stationary targets from formal stances, not combat effectiveness or quick decision-making. Many officers arrived in combat having fired fewer rounds through their Type 14 Nambu than American Marines fired in a single training day. Japanese tactical doctrine viewed pistols as symbols of authority rather than combat tools. The weapon's primary purposes included maintaining discipline, shooting deserters or cowards, honorable suicide when capture seemed imminent, and executing prisoners. Using pistols as primary combat weapons in assault seemed absurd when the warrior's sword represented his very soul. This philosophical blindness prevented recognition of the pistol's tactical importance in modern close-quarters combat. American doctrine evolved continuously based on combat feedback and hard lessons. After Guadalcanal, training emphasized shooting from prone and supine positions, common scenarios when wounded or taking cover. After Tarawa, where Marines fought in waist-deep water, training incorporated waterborne operations, keeping weapons dry during amphibious landings, clearing water from barrels, and immediate action procedures after immersion. After reports of Japanese infiltrators entering marine foxholes, training incorporated weapon retention techniques and contact distance shooting practiced at arm's length. The ammunition philosophy differed radically between the nations. Americans designed the .45 ACP for one singular purpose: maximum stopping power within practical constraints. Velocity was deliberately kept subsonic to avoid transonic instability and unpredictable performance. Bullet weight maximized momentum transfer and energy dump. The round's rainbow trajectory at distance meant nothing. Pistol fights happened within 25 yards, period. Japanese 8mm Nambu development prioritized velocity and trajectory, seeking rifle-like performance from a pistol cartridge. This pursuit of inappropriate characteristics sacrificed stopping power for negligible practical advantage. Cultural factors profoundly influenced weapons employment and modification. American individualism encouraged personal initiative and adaptation. Marines filed their M1911A1 sights for faster draw, stippled front straps for better grip purchase, and shortened triggers for smaller hands. Such modifications would have been utterly unthinkable in the Japanese military, where conformity remained absolute and initiative discouraged below senior ranks. The Japanese concept of bamboo spear spirit, the belief that spiritual power could overcome material disadvantage, pervaded military thinking completely. When Chinese forces complained about the Type 14's inadequacy against Russian-supplied weapons, Japanese advisors responded that insufficient warrior spirit, not inferior weapons, caused failures. This denial of material reality prevented systematic improvement of weapons systems. American pragmatism demanded measurable effectiveness. The Bureau of Ordnance conducted continuous testing of ammunition performance, accumulating data on velocity, pressure, accuracy, and terminal ballistics. Feedback from combat units drove modifications. Improved magazine springs addressed feeding problems. Harder extractors solved extraction failures. Enhanced rust-preventive finishes supported tropical service. Each modification underwent rigorous testing before implementation, ensuring improvements actually delivered better performance. The Pacific Theater provided the ultimate proving ground for weapons reliability, subjecting both American and Japanese pistols to environmental extremes that would have been impossible to replicate in peacetime testing. From the freezing Aleutians to the equatorial Solomons, from coral atolls barely above sea level to volcanic mountains, these environments tested every aspect of weapons design and manufacturing to absolute limits. Guadalcanal's climate represented tropical hell incarnate. Rainfall exceeded 200 inches annually, with humidity constantly at saturation. Temperatures ranged from 75 degrees at night to 95 degrees during the day, though humidity made it feel like 115 degrees, according to marine accounts. Metal rusted overnight, leather rotted completely within weeks. Wooden stocks warped and split irreversibly. In this nightmare environment, the M1911A1's parkered finish, a phosphate coating that absorbed oil and provided protection from within, proved dramatically superior to traditional bluing. Even when surface rust appeared, the pistol continued functioning reliably. The Type 14's blued finish, beautiful when new, provided minimal corrosion protection whatsoever. Surface rust appeared within days, progressing to deep pitting within weeks. Marine Armourer Sergeant Thomas Morrison, stationed with the 1st Marine Division on Guadalcanal, documented maintenance challenges in his journal, recording the ongoing battle against rust and decay. The 45s demanded attention every single day, yet they refused to quit even when caked with grime and looking absolutely terrible. Marines improvised with whatever they could find: motor oil, gun oil, coconut oil, anything that would keep the mechanisms turning. By contrast, those captured Japanese pistols turned to solid rust within 72 hours, their springs snapping the moment anyone attempted to pry them open with force. Entire piles of them sat useless, impossible to disassemble, monuments to mechanical fragility. Tarawa brought a completely different enemy to fight. Coral sand, finer than talcum powder, invaded every single mechanism relentlessly. The island offered nothing but barren reef, not a tree for shade from that merciless equatorial sun that turned metal into something that would blister skin on contact. Marines took cloth scraps and tape, wrapping pistol grips desperately to avoid third-degree burns. Water became precious beyond measure. Just 5 gallons per day for an entire battalion meant weapon cleaning was pure fantasy. The M1911A1's loose construction worked in their favor here. Sand could fall through the gaps, and the gun kept functioning. Marines learned to work that slide hard and fast, letting grit cascade out. The Japanese pistol's tight tolerances guaranteed disaster. Sand particles wedged in, locking everything solid. When fighting reached Pelelieu in September 1944, the thermometer climbed beyond anything Marines had experienced. Official reports claimed 115 degrees Fahrenheit, but down in the fighting positions amid those coral ridges, temperatures soared past 120. More Marines collapsed from heat than from enemy bullets on certain days. Metal expanded dramatically in that furnace. The M1911A1, engineered with thermal flexibility in mind, kept working perfectly. The Japanese pistol, built to peacetime specifications with no margin for heat, bound up as components expanded at different rates. Marine Eugene Sledge, serving with K Company in the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, recorded his experience. Everything metal was scorching to the touch. They wrapped rifle slings around their hands just to carry weapons. Canteens would burn lips trying to drink. His 45 got so hot, the rounds inside the magazine warmed up, heat radiating through his hands when he finally unloaded it. Yet it never failed him, not once. Iwo Jima's volcanic ash created altogether different torments. That fine black powder, essentially pulverized volcanic glass, was abrasive beyond belief, grinding into sealed mechanisms and accelerating wear exponentially. Sulfur springs dotted the island, releasing vapors that corroded metal surfaces with chemical precision. After 5 weeks of constant fighting, countless rifles and machine guns needed complete replacement because bore erosion had rendered them unreliable. The M1911A1, with its straightforward design and muscular construction, endured despite the accelerated deterioration. Type 14s started experiencing extraction problems as chambers wore smooth and brass casings stuck fast. The Aleutian campaign threw entirely opposite conditions at them. When American forces landed in May 1943, temperatures dropped below freezing, while 100-mile-per-hour winds screamed across the terrain. Lubricants thickened into tar-like sludge. Breath condensation froze instantly on metal, creating ice sheets that jammed actions shut. The M1911A1 functioned without any oil whatsoever. Soldiers learned to run them bone dry. The Japanese design, with its intricate dual recoil spring arrangement, demanded lubrication to operate. In that Arctic hell, it became completely useless. Amphibious assaults tested everything differently. At Tarawa, Marines waded 500 yards through chest-deep water, taking fire the entire way. Weapons went completely submerged for 10 or 15 minutes straight. The M1911A1, engineered with drainage paths and minimal sealed cavities, could be shaken out and would fire immediately. The Type 14, with its sealed trigger group and labyrinthine internals, held water that required complete disassembly to drain. Impossible when Japanese bullets were still coming. New Guinea and the Philippines unleashed monsoon conditions that broke men's spirits. Rain fell without pause for weeks on end, making it virtually impossible to keep weapons dry. Everything that lived rotted, leather holsters turned to slime, cloth deteriorated, wooden grips decayed. American pistols introduced plastic grips in 1943 that simply rejected moisture. Steel parts needed constant oiling but stayed functional. Japanese wooden grips on late production models soaked up moisture until they swelled and cracked the frames apart. That magazine catch spring, added back in 1939, rusted permanently in place, transforming magazine changes into impossible struggles. The two nations approached maintenance completely differently. American units received mountains of cleaning materials, bore brushes, rods, patches, CLP, specialized lubricants for extreme environments. Every Marine carried his own pistol cleaning kit. Japanese units by 1944 frequently had nothing. Captured documents revealed entire squads sharing single cleaning rods, using palm fronds as patches, substituting whatever motor oil they could scavenge. American Marines improvised brilliantly at the battalion level. They polished feed ramps with emery cloth to improve reliability, adjusted slide to frame fit using valve grinding compound to reduce friction, replaced worn springs with parts salvaged from damaged weapons. These modifications kept pistols fighting despite unimaginable wear. Japan's forces, lacking spare parts and modification capability, simply discarded broken Type 14s and fought with whatever worked. April 1st, 1945, brought the test that would settle everything, Operation Iceberg at Okinawa. 183,000 American soldiers and Marines would face 110,000 Japanese defenders on an island designated as the staging ground for Japan's invasion. The 82-day engagement would prove beyond dispute which weapons would dominate when the fighting turned absolutely savage. Okinawa's landscape looked nothing like previous Pacific battlefields. The island stretched 60 miles, with width varying from 2 to 18 miles. Northern sections held open farmland. The south erupted into brutal ridges honeycomb with caves. General Mitsuru Ushijima had months to engineer his defenses. Intricate networks of interconnected caves, tunnels, and fortified strongpoints designed to funnel American soldiers into killing grounds. Here, pistols would often determine who lived and who died. The American force totaled the entire 10th Army under Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner, including Army divisions and the Marine 3rd Amphibious Corps with 1st and 6th Marine Divisions. These units carried over 15,000 M1911A1 pistols, nearly one for every dozen combat troops. Supply lines funneled 10 million rounds of .45 ammunition, reflecting hard-won knowledge about consumption during extended campaigns. The Japanese 32nd Army, bolstered by naval personnel and drafted Okinawan civilians, represented Japan's final intact military force outside the home islands. Officers carried Type 14s, but ammunition came in critically short supply. Captured documents from the Japanese 62nd Division showed allocation of just 20 rounds per pistol for the entire battle. American troops carried 21 rounds as basic load with unlimited resupply readily available. Landing on April 1st, Easter Sunday, also April Fool's Day, surprised commanders with minimal resistance as Ushijima had repositioned forces toward prepared defenses in the south. But when American forces collided with main Japanese defensive lines at Kakazu Ridge on April 9th, the engagement's true nature emerged. Fighting collapsed into ferocious close-quarters combat measured in feet, where survival hinged on who could apply overwhelming force fastest. Technical Sergeant Beaufort Anderson of the 96th Infantry Division earned the Medal of Honor on April 13th while assaulting Kakazu Ridge. Pinned under fire, Anderson attacked Japanese positions alone with grenades and rifle fire, eliminating 25 enemy soldiers in hand-to-hand range. Witnesses noted his extensive use of that M1911A1 when Japanese emerged from spider holes at point-blank range. "The 45 saved my life a dozen times that day," Anderson remembered afterward. "When they popped up from holes right under you, there wasn't time to swing a rifle. That 45 knocked them down instantly." Japanese conducted massive counterattacks throughout the campaign, with Operation Tengo on May 4th representing the climactic push when Ushijima committed his entire reserve in desperate offensive. Close combat erupted across the entire front. Marine Private First Class Harold Argerholm of the 4th Battalion, 10th Marines, earned posthumous Medal of Honor recognition for extracting 45 wounded Marines under constant fire. Witnesses reported Argerholm carrying his M1911A1 in one hand while physically dragging casualties with the other, firing at Japanese infiltrators targeting his wounded. Cave operations on Okinawa redefined pistol importance. Japanese had transformed natural caverns into elaborate defensive systems with multiple levels, tunnel networks, and concealed positions. Taking these positions meant entering tight spaces where rifles became nearly useless. The M1911A1 became the primary weapon for this underground combat. Marine Corporal Donald Honnis of the 1st Marine Division described the experience. White phosphorus grenades went in first to consume oxygen, then operators entered with pistols and flashlights. That 45 was absolutely perfect for this work. In those confined spaces, the concussion from the 45 was absolutely devastating. Marines taped tactical lights to barrel rails. You'd see movement, point and shoot. That 45 would knock Japanese soldiers backward into cave walls. The mathematical advantage became clear. Subsonic 45 rounds meant less disorientation for the shooter while delivering maximum trauma to targets. Heavy bullets retained momentum through webbing and equipment that might deflect lighter, faster projectiles. Post-war ballistics research showed 45 ACP created larger temporary wound cavities in gelatin than any military pistol round, critical when targets needed immediate incapacitation in tight spaces, where wounded enemies could detonate grenades. Sugarloaf Hill, anchoring Japanese defensive lines, became the epicenter of the most intense close fighting from May 12th through 18th. The 6th Marine Division absorbed over 2,000 casualties, capturing that single position. Marines launched 17 separate assaults before finally securing it. Combat often occurred at arm's length. Marine Sergeant James Stevens remembered the chaos. Rain poured down, mud reached our knees. Japanese soldiers emerged from hidden positions right beside us. Your rifle would jam with mud, but that 45 always worked. I watched Marines and Japanese firing at 5 feet apart. The Marine with the 45 always won. By late May, Japanese small arms failures became catastrophic. Colonel Hiromichi Yohara, operations officer for the 32nd Army, wrote afterward, "Our Type 14 pistols had become nearly useless. Ammunition was nearly exhausted. Weapons that functioned broke down from rain and mud. American soldiers seemed to possess unlimited ammunition for their powerful pistols, which killed instantly, even with glancing hits. Mid-May brought monsoon rains that transformed Okinawa into mud. Foxholes filled with water, weapons submerged repeatedly. The M19A1 LA1's drainage paths and loose tolerances let it function despite mud immersion. Marines kept pistols inside shirts when not firing, using body heat to prevent rust. The Type 14's sealed design and tight tolerances became hopelessly clogged. Ammunition quality diverged dramatically. American 45 ammunition performed consistently throughout. Testing showed velocity variations under 30 feet per second, with 0 misfires in 100,000 rounds tested. Japanese 8mm ammunition from 1945, manufactured amid bombing and material scarcity, revealed catastrophic quality failures. Captured ammunition tested by American ordnance showed 30% misfires from faulty primers. Velocity swings exceeding 300 feet per second within single lots. Casehead separations from brittle brass, and squib loads jamming bullets inside barrels. Mid-June fighting in the Keen Peninsula at Okinawa's southern tip represented the final organized Japanese resistance. Amid coral caves and ridges, combat became its most primitive. American forces deployed flamethrowers, demolition charges, and small arms systematically eliminating positions. The 96th Infantry Division reported expending 450,000 rounds of 45 ammunition during June alone, exceeding entire ammunition expenditures in many European campaigns. Private First Class Desmond Doss, the conscientious objector medic who refused weapons, offered unique perspective. Serving with the 77th Infantry Division, Doss witnessed countless close engagements treating wounded. The difference between our 45s and their pistols was like night and day, he stated afterward. I watched Japanese officers empty pistols into our soldiers who kept fighting. When our boys hit Japanese soldiers with a 45, they went down and stayed down. That pistol saved countless American lives. Final battle statistics reflected American material dominance. American casualties included 12,520 killed and 36,631 wounded. Japanese military deaths totaled approximately 110,000 plus 100,000 Okinawan civilians. The 10-to-1 kill ratio demonstrated superior firepower throughout the entire spectrum. In close fighting where individual weapons determined survival, the M1911A1's superiority multiplied American effectiveness exponentially. Production numbers told a revealing story. American factories produced 1,878,742 M1911A1 pistols between 1941 and 45. Japan manufactured approximately 400,000 Type 14 pistols over nearly 2 decades from 1926 to 45. That 4.7-to-1 production advantage during war years alone understated true disparity when factoring quality, standardization, and ammunition supply. American manufacturing transformed production fundamentally. Remington Rand's Syracuse facility, converting from typewriter manufacturing, achieved remarkable efficiency through continuous innovation. The Americans revolutionized pistol manufacturing with broach rifling, which cut perfectly finished barrels in a single operation, instead of the slower traditional method requiring multiple cuts. Walter Schuett's statistical process control system, implemented by Western Electric engineers, held tight tolerances while dramatically boosting production speeds. By 1943, Remington Rand was churning out 1,000 pistols every single day, with a rejection rate below 1%. The American industrial machine demonstrated remarkable flexibility and learning capacity. Colt, already decades into firearms production, needed 1.2 man-hours to manufacture each M1911A1 frame back in 1942. Remington Rand, starting absolutely from scratch with zero firearms experience, had reduced that time to just 0.8 man-hours per frame by 1943 through intelligent industrial engineering and relentless optimization. Ithaca Gun Company introduced fixture designs that slashed machining setups by 60%, innovations that other manufacturers rapidly adopted. Part interchangeability became absolute and universal. In November 1943, Army Ordnance put this to the test at Aberdeen Proving Ground. Armorers systematically disassembled 100 M1911A1 pistols sourced from different manufacturers, deliberately mixed every single part into one pile, and reassembled them completely blindfolded. Every one of those 100 pistols fired flawlessly. This interchangeability mattered tremendously during depot maintenance when workers had to assemble working weapons from damaged components. Japanese Type 14 parts, even when they came from the same manufacturer, frequently demanded hand-fitting and custom work. The economic advantage was massive. An M1911A1 cost $31.42 in 1942. By 1945, manufacturing improvements had slashed that price to $15, less than half the original cost, despite wartime inflation pushing prices upward everywhere. The Japanese Type 14 demanded extensive hand-fitting and cost 78 yen throughout the war, which translated to about $31.20 in 1941 dollars, yet represented a far larger drain on Japan's already stretched industrial resources. Ammunition production made weapon manufacturing look modest by comparison. American factories produced roughly 3.5 billion rounds of 45 ACP throughout World War II. That worked out to approximately 1,162 rounds for each M1911A1 that came off the production line, plenty for thorough training programs and sustained combat operations. Japan's 8mm Nambu ammunition production reached approximately 100 million rounds across the 19 years from 1926 to 1945, which amounted to only 250 rounds per pistol over 2 entire decades. By 1945, Japanese forces were rationing 20 rounds per pistol for entire campaigns. These numbers revealed profound philosophical differences between the two industrial systems. Every single American M1911A1 underwent rigorous proof testing with high-pressure ammunition that generated 30% more pressure than standard loads. Barrels were air-gauged to guarantee dimensional accuracy. Function testing demanded that each pistol fire 100 rounds without a single malfunction. Random samples went through brutal 5,000-round endurance tests. Metallurgical analysis confirmed proper heat treatment and material composition. Japanese quality control, already minimal before the war, had essentially vanished completely by 1944. Late-war Type 14 pistols displayed tool marks, dimensional variations, and soft metal that would have been instantly rejected under any serious inspection standard. The supply chain story was equally revealing. American manufacturers received specialized steel alloys, including SAE 4140 for barrels and 8620 for frames, produced to exacting specifications by suppliers who understood precision manufacturing. Carbide cutting tools, themselves products of American industrial superiority, maintained precise dimensions through thousands and thousands of parts. By 1944, Japanese manufacturers used whatever steel happened to be available. Captured Type 14 pistols showed frames manufactured from recycled ship armor, barrels fashioned from artillery brass, and springs salvaged from automotive parts pulled from junkyards. Subcontractor networks multiplied American advantages exponentially. Grip manufacturers, including Colt Plastics Company, Francite Company, and Keys Fiber Company, produced millions of synthetic grips that withstood tropical humidity and saltwater. Spring manufacturers like Wolf Company and Associated Spring Corporation supplied consistent springs heat treated for exact tension specifications. Magazine contractors such as Scoville Manufacturing and Risdon Manufacturing produced magazines to tolerances that guaranteed perfect interchangeability. Japanese production remained locked within arsenal walls, severely limiting output capacity and preventing the specialization benefits that outsourcing provided. The training ammunition allocation revealed different combat philosophies. American forces allocated 240 rounds per man just for basic pistol qualification, then 500 rounds for advanced training. Combat units received 100 rounds monthly for ongoing sustainment training. Total training expenditure surpassed 500 million rounds across all forces. Japanese officers, who typically purchased their own ammunition, fired fewer than 100 rounds annually. Many arrived in combat having discharged their Type 14 fewer times than American Marines fired during single training sessions. Replacement rates told the story of actual combat conditions. American forces replaced approximately 15% of M1911A1 pistols each year due to combat loss, damage beyond repair, or severe wear. The industrial base easily absorbed this attrition while simultaneously expanding total inventory. Japanese forces couldn't replace losses. When units lost pistols to combat damage, soldiers simply had to continue fighting without them. By the time fighting reached Okinawa, many Japanese officers carried nothing but swords, their pistols having failed long since. The Pacific War's final accounting exposed truths far deeper than technical specifications or production numbers. Across millions of square miles of ocean and thousands of islands in humanity's largest naval conflict, the superiority of the M1911A1 over the Type 14 Nambu represented American industrial democracy's victory over Japanese military feudalism. Terminal ballistics followed inexorable mathematical laws. The 45 ACP fired a 230-grain bullet at 830 feet per second, delivering 370 foot-pounds of kinetic energy and creating temporary wound cavities exceeding 4 inches in diameter when tested in ballistic gelatin. The 8mm Nambu fired a 102-grain bullet at 1,665 feet per second, generating 256 foot-pounds of energy and creating wound channels barely larger than the bullet's diameter. This 44% energy advantage translated directly to stopping power, the ability to immediately disable an enemy before they could continue their attack. Yet energy alone told only part of the story. The 45 ACP's heavier bullet maintained velocity more effectively, retaining 89% of muzzle energy at 50 yards, compared to 76% for the 8mm Nambu. The larger frontal area, 0.451 inches against 0.320 inches, produced 98% greater tissue displacement. The subsonic velocity eliminated the ballistic crack that could disorient shooters in confined spaces. The straight-walled case extracted reliably even from dirty, fouled chambers. Every single technical parameter favored the American cartridge. The weapons themselves reflected these cartridge characteristics. The M1911A1's sturdy construction, weighing 39 ounces when empty, absorbed recoil while providing a steady shooting platform. The single-action trigger, braking at 4 to 5 pounds, enabled accurate shot placement even under extreme stress. The grip safety and manual safety prevented accidental discharge while maintaining instant readiness. The 7-round magazine, despite holding one fewer round than the Type 14, could be changed in seconds, and the pistol would continue firing its chambered round even without any magazine present. The Type 14's supposed advantages proved to be illusions. Its lighter weight of 32 ounces made recoil significantly harder to manage. The heavy, gritty trigger action degraded accuracy substantially. The safety location required both hands to operate. The magazine retention spring made reloading nearly impossible during combat stress. The magazine disconnect safety transformed magazine damage into complete weapon failure. Every alleged improvement actually made combat effectiveness worse. Combat experience validated the American weapon overwhelmingly. At Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, the M1911A1 proved itself through thousands of close-quarters engagements. Marines and soldiers trusted their lives to this pistol, confident it would function regardless of mud, sand, water, or neglect. The psychological impact magnified its effectiveness further. Japanese soldiers learned to dread the distinctive boom of the .45, knowing it meant immediate death. Post-war analysis by the United States Strategic Bombing Survey included extensive interviews with Japanese officers who survived. Colonel Susumu Nishiura, a staff officer with the 32nd Army on Okinawa, stated plainly, "Your .45 caliber automatic pistol was greatly feared. It would knock a man down with hits to the extremities. Our pistols required multiple center hits to stop an American soldier. This disparity in effectiveness was demoralizing to our forces." Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, commanding Japanese forces on Iwo Jima, wrote in his final report before his death, "American material superiority is overwhelming. Their individual weapons, particularly their powerful pistols, give them great advantage in close combat where spiritual power cannot overcome mechanical superiority." This admission from an officer who had spent years in America as a military attaché revealed Japanese recognition of their material inadequacy. The industrial gap was simply insurmountable. American factories produced more M1911A1 pistols in 1943 alone, over 600,000, than Japan manufactured Type 14s across 2 decades. American quality continuously improved throughout production, while Japanese quality steadily collapsed. American ammunition supply seemed limitless, while Japanese forces rationed every cartridge carefully. American training was extensive, while Japanese training remained minimal. Every measurable parameter favored American forces by factors ranging from 3 to 1 to 10 to 1. The human cost crystallized these advantages starkly. Throughout the Pacific War, Marine and Army units armed with M1911A1 pistols consistently achieved kill ratios exceeding 10 to 1 in close combat. On Iwo Jima, 6,821 Americans died versus 21,000 Japanese, a 3 to 1 ratio despite attacking heavily fortified positions. On Okinawa, 12,520 Americans died versus 110,000 Japanese, an 8.8 to 1 ratio. While many factors contributed to these disparities, individual weapon effectiveness in close combat played a crucial role. Veterans' testimonies provided the final verdict. Marine Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone, before his death on Iwo Jima, wrote, "The .45 automatic is the finest military pistol ever made. It hits like a sledgehammer and never fails. One shot ends any argument." Technical Sergeant Charles Lindbergh of the 3rd Marine Division stated that pistols saved more Marine lives than any other weapon. When Japanese soldiers got inside our lines at night, the .45 was what stopped them. Japanese veterans who survived American .45 ACP hits carried distinctive scars. Dr. Teru Okueno, treating veterans at Tokyo Veterans Hospital after the war, noted, "Wounds from the American .45 caliber pistol were immediately recognizable decades later. The massive tissue damage created distinctive scarring patterns. Veterans who had been shot with this weapon considered themselves fortunate to have survived." The M1911A1's legacy extended far beyond World War II. Special Operations Forces carried it through Korea, Vietnam, and into the 21st century. The Type 14 vanished immediately after Japanese surrender, replaced entirely by American weapons. Modern Japanese self-defense forces have never attempted to design indigenous pistols, recognizing the futility of competing with Western small arms development. The broader implications transcended mere weapons. The M1911A1 represented American industrial democracy. Standardized, mass-produced, effective, and issued to every soldier regardless of rank or wealth. The Type 14 represented Japanese military feudalism, handcrafted, inconsistent, inadequate, and restricted to officers who could afford to purchase their own. These weapons embodied their society's fundamentally different approaches to warfare. In the final analysis, the Pacific War validated the Thompson-Lagarde test's 1904 conclusion that in close combat, stopping power determined survival. The M1911A1 delivered that stopping power reliably, consistently, under any condition, millions of times. The Type 14 Nambu failed to deliver adequate performance even under ideal conditions. This disparity multiplied across millions of individual combats and contributed significantly to American victory. The mathematics of death in the Pacific War were precise and utterly unforgiving. When Staff Sergeant William Bourdillon charged Japanese pillboxes on Tarawa, when Sergeant John Basilone held Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, when thousands of unnamed Marines and soldiers fought in nameless caves on forgotten islands, they carried a weapon that would not fail them. The M1911A1 automatic pistol, firing the 45 ACP cartridge, sent a simple but devastating message with each trigger pull. A 230-grain projectile, launched at 830 feet per second, delivered 370 foot-pounds of kinetic energy, creating wound channels that immediately incapacitated enemy combatants. This simple equation, mass times velocity squared, divided by 450,240, determined survival in countless close-quarters engagements. The Japanese Type 14 Nambu, firing its 102-grain bullet at 1,065 feet per second for 256 foot-pounds of energy, consistently failed this mathematical test of combat effectiveness. Production statistics told an equally decisive story. American factories manufactured 1,878 AAJUs 742 M1911A1 pistols during World War II, supported by 3.5 billion rounds of ammunition. Japan produced approximately 400,000 Type 14 pistols over 2 decades, with perhaps 100 million rounds total. This 4.7 to 1 production advantage in pistols and 35 to 1 advantage in ammunition during just the war years represented industrial supremacy that no amount of spiritual power could overcome. But beyond these numbers lay a fundamental truth about modern warfare. Victory belongs to nations that combine industrial capacity with engineering excellence, that value individual soldiers' lives enough to equip them with superior weapons, that learn from combat experience and systematically improve their tools of war. The M1911A1 embodied these principles. The Type 14 Nambu represented their opposite. In the end, many factors determined the Pacific War's outcome: strategy, logistics, code-breaking, naval power, and atomic weapons. But in those desperate moments when combat reduced to its most primitive form, one man facing another at arm's length with death seconds away, the American Marine or soldier with an M1911A1 held overwhelming advantage over his Japanese opponent with a Type 14 Nambu. The thunder of the 45 ACP echoed from Pearl Harbor to Tokyo Bay, each shot a small but decisive contribution to victory. The M1911A1 didn't win the Pacific War alone, but in the brutal arithmetic of close combat, it ensured that American forces held a crushing advantage that multiplied across thousands of engagements to help determine the war's outcome. In this mathematics of survival, where stopping power equaled victory and mechanical failure meant death, America's M1911A1 45 caliber pistol stood supreme, and Japan's Type 14 Nambu was utterly, catastrophically, and fatally outgunned. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz understood the importance of individual weapons in determining victory and gave the final word. Our technology, including the superiority of individual weapons, like the M1911 automatic pistol, gave our Marines and soldiers decisive advantages in close combat. When battles came down to individual fights at close quarters, American forces prevailed because they carried superior weapons that functioned reliably under the worst conditions imaginable. This technical superiority, multiplied millions of times across the Pacific, helped secure our victory.